So most of our interest is in, I guess, the developing world, where there's a lot of landfill, not a lot of capital and resources to address the methane. And this is really kind of a perfect opportunity to tackle the methane in those locations.
Hello, I am codyellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. In this episode, I talk with Sam Kivi, CTO and Director at GridShare, a New Zealand company building flexible load infrastructure centered around renewable energy and Bitcoin mining. We talk about GridShare's Bitcoin mining operations at Monowai Hydroelectric Power Station in the South Island of New Zealand, their plans to grow the business to explore methane capture from landfills enabled by Bitcoin mining, and the broader opportunities for demand response and renewable energy infrastructure growth in New Zealand. If you would like to support my work and growing this show, please consider tipping some Bitcoin to the show's wallet. Otherwise, pass this episode on to a friend who you think may enjoy it. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. My emails are always open, hello@thetransformationofvalue.com. Otherwise, on to the show. Sam, how have you been? How's things with GridShare? How's things with you? What have you been working on, man?
Yeah, good. It's been, I think, it always feels hectic. There's always a bit of a hustle to get where we want to be. I think some of the things that we're trying to do are quite long-term and strategic, and sometimes that's hard to communicate across to anyone that might be in a position to help get us along on our journey. But we have an operation. We have our data center operating at Monowai, and that's going well. That's growing. That's developing. We're developing capabilities on that site, which we could talk about. But GridShare has been, in the last 6 months especially, 6 months to a year, really taking a new angle towards landfill methane mitigation. So that's really important for us. It's been a new focus for us, away from less focus on the direct renewable energy siting. We are still working on those, but it's an exciting new direction for us to also pursue.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I am keen to dive into that. And I did want to mention as well that our last episode, Balancing the New Zealand Power Grid with Bitcoin Mining and Renewable Energy, the episode I did with you, that's actually been our most popular episode ever on the show. So it says to me that there's a deep interest in New Zealand Bitcoin mining and what GridShare is doing. So I wanted to share that with you because for me, having spoken with you, having seen you guys grow your operation, it really is inspiring in that it brings some of those New Zealand attributes, innovation, kind of rolling up your sleeves and doing the work, and it's actually producing the goods. You've got this site, and you're actively looking to expand and innovate, and that, and so I think that's really cool. But in terms of this move towards the methane and the landfill stuff, so tell me more about that. How did that come about?
Yeah, I think we had always looked at, from the very early days, sources of carbon emissions and the opportunity to capture methane. I think there was always this general assumption that burning methane wasn't necessarily a carbon negative process. But as we've looked at it, it's become more and more apparent that if a landfill is venting methane, and that landfill has no incentive to capture the methane, generate electricity, and put it into the grid, because it may have a challenge, like it's too far from the grid for that to be viable, then we have a real bit of value to add there that's directly mitigating methane. And I think for most people, if they don't understand, methane from a landfill, or any methane that's in the atmosphere, is 80 times worse than carbon dioxide in roughly the first 20 years that it gets into the atmosphere. So we can have a real impact now by starting off a chain reaction of projects that will identify landfills that are venting. We'll give them a business case, a viable operation, a reason to capture the gas and invest in that, and thereby really prevent some of the worst and most rapid warming. So that's something that we're proud to be working on. We've got partners in CH4 Capital who have identified essentially mitigating methane as the best mitigation per dollar that you could probably possibly invest in. And we're just really waiting for the rest of the world to wake up and see this, because I think it's 50% of the world's landfills are in this position, and it's a lot of developing countries, and there's just so much out there to do. Yeah. We can't do it alone.
How do you feel about the economic question? Because there's sort of two things here: the pure economics of mining Bitcoin with electricity, selling Bitcoin, and that being a business of capital, setting up infrastructure, seeking out the lowest cost of power. And then what we're talking about here, which I think also sits alongside other ancillary value add questions around, say, heat, usage of heat, etc. What are your thoughts on that? Because I've certainly got some ideas and questions about it. But in terms of those two models, the sort of the pure Bitcoin mining piece versus some other thing to make it work, like how do you compare those?
Yeah, look, Bitcoin mining, if you just look at it as rawest form, it's always going to chase the cheapest power. If you look at the fundamentals of Bitcoin, the network, the way it operates, Bitcoin miners who don't access, find and secure cheap electricity will die. Eventually, they will not survive. Okay, that's fundamental number one. Now, what we see in there, coming from an energy perspective, which is where we started this, is there's an opportunity to recognize that and add value to initially renewable energy, but now landfill, to provide an incentive and an economic foundation for an operation to happen where it otherwise wouldn't. And that could be a wind farm that might have been too remote without a Bitcoin farm to help operate it, or it might have been too variable. And in the landfill, it might be the same. It might be too remote from the electrical grid connection. So they can use a Bitcoin mine to access the value of the electricity that methane would produce, and their value adds. And I think heat reuse, all of these additional applications where you can bring Bitcoin mining to help solve an economic challenge in that situation, and that might be using fossil fuels to heat a facility. Why do that when you can use a Bitcoin infrastructure to help heat that with renewable energy?
That's interesting. So I guess querying that a little bit, because I must admit, deep down, I really want to believe, in a sense, when it comes to the heat reuse story, and in particular with this the methane side of things. And I think that those two items feel a little bit separate to, say, plugging into a new build that needs something to pay for it while it's waiting to connect to the grid. I've looked quite closely at the heat reuse stuff, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this, but I'm struggling, as much as I want to see it happen, I'm struggling to see its integration into industrial pipelines in an economically competitive way that couldn't just be done with, say, heat pumps or some other technology. And so what is the formula? So, taking the heat piece to start with, how do you see that working in a way that isn't just going to, like, we're not just doing it for fun? We can talk freely about this, I hope, but sure. I went to Prague and I went to Hong Kong, and I saw these machines, and that, you can heat water and you can do this stuff, but just the capital input to put that into an industrial facility and to, like, retrofit a facility when there is already a whole universe of selection of stuff you can put in there to heat water, for example. I just don't know if I could see the economics of it from a practical perspective. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, there's certainly ways to go here on demonstrating this and proving this can roll out at scale. And I will say it really depends on the application. The devil is in the detail. If you need a 500-degree water, this is not going to do it. But a use case that could work for you is a brewery, right? They're constantly heating water up. Maybe they want 80, 90-degree water. Maybe we can't quite get it there with a Bitcoin mine infrastructure. But you can probably do the bulk of that slowly and in the background, kind of in the same way that you would heat a space in an office with a slow background heat. And maybe when everyone comes in at 9 o'clock in the morning, you run a little peaker heat pump just to boost it up, right? And so I'm not saying that Bitcoin is going to replace all heating. There's applications and use cases and heat profiles where I think there's definitely applications. Swimming pools is one where typically you might see a community swimming pool that has a diesel heater, for example, and that diesel heater is designed to quite rapidly put a lot of energy into the water and heat it up and then turn on and off and keep that water at temperature roughly. Whereas a Bitcoin mine could keep that at a lower energy input over time, slowly heat it up to temperature, but then keep it running economically right through, provided we've got either solar on site that's helping supplement the power, or a good renewable energy contract to power that.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the sort of stuff I've been thinking about, having seen a lot of this hardware in real life, and sort of thinking, okay, how do you then go and identify sites or opportunities for deploying this? And it really seems like that the devil's in the detail. That's where the challenge lies. And I guess we were talking about the heat story. I mean, the landfills are another whole thing. Those, I guess, within the New Zealand context, is that something that you guys have done a bit of research on? You've identified some.
Yep. I will say we are actively doing work on New Zealand-based landfills and securing locations. But I will say that New Zealand already does a great job of capturing most of its methane in the larger landfills and dealing with it, either flaring it or generating electricity with it, which is great. Because most of these big landfills, they are near grid infrastructure and it's not a problem. One place in the New Zealand context where I think there's room to explore, but it's probably not where we're going to start, is identifying a model where we can go to smaller landfills that wouldn't justify any sort of infrastructure without what we're proposing. So most of our interest is in, I guess, the developing world, where there's a lot of landfill, not a lot of capital and resources to address the methane, and this is really kind of a perfect opportunity to tackle the methane in those locations.
What I like about that, Sam, is I've been thinking a lot about this concept that, for me, Bitcoin is a transformative technology similar to fiber optic or 5G for New Zealand.
Absolutely.
The unbundling of the copper lines, all of these classic stories that we've seen. And what I really love about what you've just shared is this idea that, homegrown tech and the nuts and bolts of building something like this could then be exported as a technology, but it's built upon Bitcoin. You know what I mean? And, as you say, New Zealand is pretty good with a lot of this stuff. But let's take the developing nation model. I mean, what sort of places are we looking at here? I mean, in terms of profiles for countries? Yeah,
so looking very closely in South America, Central America, those places where there's a lot of urban infrastructure, but they'll have a landfill that's way out of town and a long way from any connecting infrastructure. And very little incentive to capture, other than the carbon credits that you can obviously discuss with the government of the region, how you're helping with their climate goals as relates to the Paris Accord.
Interesting. You mentioned carbon credits. How do those fit into these ideas we're talking about?
Yeah, so it's a pretty important part of it. Essentially, depending on the project, if you plan appropriately, you can apply to have carbon credits earned by a project that can be demonstrated as additional reduction in carbon emissions. So that can be a significant component of the economics of an operation, and including attracting investment in that operation through the acquisition of those carbon credits through the operation through its life.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess the other thing, I was having a chat with somebody who works quite closely in the oil and gas industry, and they'd done a lot of work in Africa and other places, and I was talking about Bitcoin, and they were open-minded to it. However, it was a struggle for them to understand kind of the logistics and I guess the administrative challenges of working in the developing world, of deploying solutions, especially high-tech stuff like Bitcoin mining, where there is, electronics and some infrastructure required in terms of internet connections and things. How do you see navigating that? How do you see deploying these solutions in a place where there's maybe not as much legal clarity as New Zealand?
Definitely challenging. Some of the regions we're looking at, there's a really heavy dose of care and risk management and mitigation is required, and getting good advice on that as you go into any of these regions. One of the challenges we have is so many different regions, different countries are presenting opportunities. The cost of actually going into one country and setting up an operation legally as an entity there and doing that in a way that you're ensuring your operation is secure, risks are mitigated, is quite expensive. So really focusing on just getting into one operation operating in a country now, not spreading ourselves too thin and too many opportunities.
Yeah, when it comes to that, still there's kind of this image of these faraway places and sort of how we can go in and help, but it's sort of, there is a reality on the ground, right? That sometimes, things are just not working. Let's be honest, there can be corruption and there can be issues. And I'm wondering, just bringing this conversation back to New Zealand. New Zealand has extremely low corruption. It's a very stable place. We've got strong rule of law. What sort of premium or value would you place, say, on operations in a place like New Zealand versus these developing nations? Does that factor into the economic?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
From day one. When we were negotiating to build the Monowai operation, that was a significant component in our conversations with our partners about picking a country that they knew they would be secure to operate in. So I think that and the green resources that are available here, I think, are going to drive the value in operations in New Zealand into the future. We do have an electricity cost challenge here compared to some parts of the world, because you are competing on a global scale. Unfortunately, although some electricity contracts might be cheap in New Zealand, they're not cheap globally. So that's one challenge that New Zealand has. But you can really look at those advantages that you just mentioned, the security, the low corruption of New Zealand, the ease of operation here as an advantage for anyone looking to come to New Zealand and take part.
So I do want to drill into that a bit. So obviously New Zealand on a cost basis, there are countries out there that can offer much cheaper rates of electricity. There can be good deals found in certain places, and we don't have to talk numbers, but certainly in South Island, hydropower, etc., can be affordable. But I guess on a global scale, how would you rate, say, some of the best rates that New Zealand has available to it versus other countries?
It honestly depends what month you ask me, because right now we're seeing extraordinarily high rates and futures for electricity in New Zealand, and there's a number of things that feed into that. The Ukraine war, that immediately pushed all the electricity prices up, the futures for electricity up in New Zealand. Although the real direct connection is pretty tenuous there. So what I would like to see, and this was really the original goal, founding goal of GridShare, was to use this as a tool to build more renewables, thereby having greater supply, managing the variability of those renewables, which eases their integration into the grid. Therefore, we have a more plentiful supply to help bring down those peaks and periods when the prices are really high. So
in terms of that market, the futures market for electricity in New Zealand, I know a couple of weeks ago, might have been a couple of months ago now, there was that scare around the blackouts potentially. Can you tell us a bit about maybe how that related to what Monowai is doing, what you guys are doing with GridShare?
Yeah. So that was confluence, I think, of some maintenance that was planned to be done before the winter chill came to New Zealand, which usually drives up electricity prices. And I think the chill came earlier than they had planned, and that maintenance wasn't done, which meant a significant piece of generating infrastructure was out. And I think lessons learned from the past, I think Transpower and others worked in advance this time to really work with everybody to send the message out, hey, we need to pull together. And I think that's cool. It's cool that we really managed to pull that off. I think more and more projects like what we're offering, which, yes, they do consume a lot of electricity, but they are there by design to turn off when these things happen, to avoid them in the first instance. And if you think about expanding that concept so that it takes a greater piece of the generation infrastructure in New Zealand, therefore you have more of it to turn off and to be able to respond to these periods. I mean, we were already off. Our data center was off. And the last few months, it's probably been on about 25% of the time, purely because of the strain, the supply-demand strain that is in the market right now.
Interesting. What do you see as the opportunity for scaling this up? Because, I mean, new builds take many years to get through the pipeline and that. But as it is today, a situation like what you have at GridShare with the Monowai Power Station, I mean, how many opportunities like that are already out there in New Zealand today for Bitcoin mining to expand into, do you think?
I think there's a lot. The challenge is the understanding and the touching and the feeling of a project that really works. Hopefully that's what Monowai will prove to be. It's really a demonstrator of the technology that this is really viable. And it's really the challenge now for a lot of these sites is about working in conjunction with a generator, not at arm's length with a contract. If you've got two parties who are each one's trying to get the lowest price, the other's trying to get the highest price, then you often end up with a situation where you can't come to an agreement on a price because each side has to cover their risk. Whereas what I'm really trying to work towards is almost joint venture projects where the generator and the miner are working together, are sharing in the profits either way. If the mine has to be off, our incentives are aligned. But if the profits are shared, that helps make the right decision for the supply of electricity into the grid when it's required. Yeah.
How long has the GridShare mine been operational for now?
Be 2 years now.
2 years.
Yeah, we started about June 2022.
Oh, great. Yeah. So 2 years. Have you been able to, talk to this, whether it's local council, regional council, government, energy corporates? I mean, have you had an opportunity to talk about the case study of GridShare? We're
just starting to do that.
I see.
We have an opportunity to present a paper on the case study of Monowai at the Electricity Engineers Association conference later this year.
Oh, excellent.
So that'll be where we detail really what this site has done. I think we really do need to bring this to a broader conversation at higher levels. I'd love this to be part of the national conversation about our energy transition. What I hear on the radio, what we all hear about the challenges of the energy transition, how much it's going to cost us as taxpayers, how much investment is required, buzz about trying to meet all of these EVs that are going to be around. The message that I really want to bring to that conversation is one of utilization. We don't look hard at that transmission and distribution infrastructure in New Zealand and say, why is this only utilized 40%? A lot of the substations and transmission lines, they're designed to handle the peak of demand when everyone's cooking dinner on a cold night and running their heaters. But most of the time it's not being utilized. So what I would really love to see at a national level is recognition that if we utilized with flexible loads like Bitcoin mines, all the capacity when it's not being demanded by the residential or commercial operations, if we utilized all of that, the cost per kilowatt to deliver a kilowatt hour to those consumers will drop. If you own $1 million truck fleet, but you only run it 40% of the time, what is your cost per kilometre of operation? It's going to be pretty poor. So I would love to talk about this new opportunity of boosting the utilisation of all those assets and therefore lowering the cost to each individual consumer of delivering that electricity, because it's really one of the sticking points. You can drive the cost of generation down, but the transmission and distribution is still such a significant portion that it impacts the bill for the end consumer. And if you follow that through, that is also holding back decarbonisation in general. If you've got a lot of industry processes that are not converting to renewable electricity because it's not cheap enough or it's not viable, if you can drive down the transmission and the generation costs, then a lot of those industries will look at this again and say, I'm going to convert to that because it's cheaper now. And the way we get there is with utilisation of these assets with flexible loads.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I mean, that speaks to me as well that, you want to have the carrot, not the stick when it comes to these things. And I mean, perhaps the stick could be considered in just having insane high prices as well. But that kind of lowering of people's quality of life, people having to turn off heaters in winter because they can't afford it, etc. I mean, I don't think that's a very nice place to be.
100%. And this is something that it bothers me a lot. We talk about conserving electricity. We talk about turning off things when electricity gets high or the demand is high. That is not a reality for a lot of people. And neither is installing solar on your roof to reduce your energy bills. It's just not a reality for so many people in New Zealand. That's why my focus is really through grid share, but also involvement in some charities around the energy transition, really trying to get the message out that lowering the cost of delivering renewable electricity to everybody is how we improve everybody's life and well-being.
Can you tell me more about that? The charity that you're working with?
Yeah, recently founded with a group of fellow Littleton locals, the Littleton Energy Transition Society, and we're still finding our way, but we're really it's a wonderful group of really motivated individuals who want to see reduction of fossil fuels, and increasing the resilience of the community, because they went through some tough times after the earthquakes, being quite cut off with infrastructure, and increasing adoption and uptake of renewable energy for everybody, not just those who can afford to invest in solar on their house, for example.
Yeah. Well, certainly, Sam, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, having been, I've done a little bit of travel this year and seeing sort of how other configurations work in terms of, Europe and the way their network is, and just the scale of infrastructure that you get, whether it's roads or electricity, it's a very different beast to these islands in the South Pacific. Mm-hmm. And, I haven't quite got a thesis yet, but I just feel like there's a certain different approach that is necessary to make New Zealand work. And there's sort of long, stringy networks, the two big islands,
absolutely,
the cable between them. And it's sort of transmission costs are really interesting. I mean, do you know off the top of your head just sort of what, say for a consumer, what sort of percentage of the fees of their electricity would be consumed?
At least 50%.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's, I think it varies from region to region, but it's a significant percentage. Yeah. I'm not sure if you're familiar with rewiring Aotearoa and
the cherries.
Mike Casey's work on that. Yeah. Mike's doing some great stuff, and on the cherry farm, absolutely really demonstrating electrifying your farm is possible and beneficial for the farm operation. But Mike's also CEO of Rewiring Aotearoa. I really recommend everyone look up the work that they're doing. Mike gave a presentation recently really laying out, he's really pushing to say in homes we can focus on making choices as we go through life and renovate or upgrade or fix devices, choosing the electric option. So don't replace that gas heater for your water. Put in something that's electric, or even better, something that's heat pump electric. So that's the message that Rewiring Aotearoa is showing. And Mike has this great bit of data and a slide that shows the general cost of generation, and then the cost of transmission and the cost of distribution, and what it costs when it gets to the end consumer. And therefore, what can the end consumer do to offset or mitigate that cost by putting in solar or choosing a battery? It doesn't work for everybody in society, but it still really lays out how much of an impact that transmission and distribution plays on the cost of delivering the electricity.
That's fascinating. And I wonder, in terms of, say, energy sovereignty as well, this isn't a case where we have, easy alternatives. You got to put the oil on the boat, or the petroleum on the boat, to get it to New Zealand.
The coal, yeah.
And the coal.
We bring in coal.
That's right.
We buy coal, from Indonesia.
That's right.
To run the Huntly Power Station. Now, I have heard some really promising work being done by the Huntly Power Station to trial biomass. I don't know how that will play out in the long run, but yeah, coal being imported, and that's really, the Huntly Power Station is really meeting that load centre in the Auckland region at night when people turn on their heaters and get up in the morning, and it's supplementing that variable supply that we have from wind and solar.
Yeah, and I wonder that that reliance on hydrocarbons coming in, whether it's vehicles or industrial processes, etc. I mean, the fact is, if you can use electric vehicles or whatever for those processes instead, there's a little bit more sovereignty there, because the electricity, at least, we can generate through our current hydro schemes and renewable energy. And so it's sort of the work you mentioned with Mike and Rewiring Aotearoa, that sort of maybe speaks to that resilience. Absolutely.
I mean, to some degree, there is a reliance on getting that equipment that operates from elsewhere. We don't have the scale to manufacture that stuff here, not yet anyway. Maybe that's possible at some point in the future. But I think absolutely that's a part of it. One of the things I can never get past is really looking out the window of my office every day and seeing the energy that's at play in front of me: wind, solar, wave. And we really can't forget what an abundance of renewable energy we have. It really is mind-boggling in New Zealand. I'm not suggesting that we capture all of it. We wouldn't know what to do with all of it. But there is just so much renewable energy around us. It's about picking the right way and the most economic way to capture what we need to help improve lives and society in New Zealand. I think that we really can't forget how much renewable energy is around us all the time.
What do you think? I mean, taking another look at that, though, I mean, I was traveling through Germany, last month, and it's often talked about, Germany's kind of failure with wind and its kind of overinvestment and they're sort of putting them anywhere they can, even if they're not going. And there's sort of there are criticisms of wind that are made, but I guess within the New Zealand context, taking solar and wind aside, I mean, where does new baseload energy come from? I mean, can we build hydro schemes again? It seems like it's a bit tenuous.
Yeah, I don't particularly think that there's a lot of options for new hydro. They're very big projects. They definitely have their ecological impacts, and they actually have some climate emissions impacts too. That's often not discussed much. But I think that there are run-of-river hydro options that have been previously not explored that I think could be looked at again. And I think what we're doing with flexible loads that can be placed at sites like these, we can potentially make these sorts of sites more viable that are smaller. So rather than focusing on only huge projects that have economies of scale, I think you could potentially look at projects that are smaller, that were looked over in the past, and that includes wind as well, that aren't viable because they didn't have a scale of economy that made sense at the time. But we can, I think, reevaluate some of those projects now.
So you talk about the run of the river hydro, because I know the Monowai site, that's quite far from the lake itself. It's a canaled
That's right, yeah.
project, right?
Yeah.
And I know it might be one of the braided rivers in Canterbury that's got quite an extensive irrigation offtake. I don't know if
Waimakariri.
it might be the Waimakariri, yeah. I mean, these projects maybe are a little bit more realistic in this current day than damming off a whole lake or a whole valley. I mean, is it realistic, do you think, to see smaller hydro emerge?
I think so, yeah. There's obviously, we need a good framework to make sure that that's not just sort of run roughshod over the country. Yeah. It has to be done right.
Oh, yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily pick hydro. I mention hydro because it's possible. There are hydro run-of-the-river projects that are possible.
I see.
We maybe should look at again. But I certainly wouldn't put hydro up as the first renewable energy angle to take. I'm quite interested in wind. I'm very interested in the future of wave tidal. And there's also some quite interesting work being done in geothermal that doesn't require direct access to a volcanically active area, using new technologies that have been developed in drilling through the fracking industry, ironically enough. Yeah, so I think there's a whole lot coming, and just we're on the cusp of it, of what's available.
Oh, yeah. So sorry, I mean, as I said though, I mean, there has been criticisms, and I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, but in particular with the wind piece, and I'm just wondering if you have any comments on that, whether this sort of the argument that without subsidies it doesn't work. Is there any validity in that, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm an expert opinion on this either, but my view is that wind is difficult because it's not dispatchable. And there's a technical term in that you can't just turn it on like a coal plant when it's needed. When everyone comes home and turns on their ovens at night and the load demand goes up, you can't just turn on the wind. It's nice if it's blowing, but if it isn't, what do you do then? And so it's a valid challenge, but that's what ultimately brings down the value that wind can produce, the contracts that they can secure, is because they sort of, they're not dispatchable. They're sort of a last resort sort of supply. And I think that diversifying and decentralizing into more numerous sites and using a flexible load like a Bitcoin mine or a compute data center, to be able to balance and deliver some level of dispatchability throughout that with a more decentralized network of wind sites. Yeah, I'm really excited to see where that could go if we take the opportunity.
Yeah, and solar as well is quite interesting, and I think I'm more and more interested in how those the cost curve of solar has been just going down and down.
Yep. One of the things with solar that is always going to be a challenge is that solar produces power all at the same time across the country, generally speaking, when everyone's left for work, and stops before everyone comes home from work generally. And so solar has a particular use case, I think, in powering industrial processes that are running during the day and charging up, quote unquote, allowing the hydro.
Someone's above us.
there's some creaking going on in this room. Allowing the hydro to back off, but there's a market challenge there, in that I think the market needs to value hydro storage for this to really work. Right now, it doesn't. Not sufficiently anyway. There's an incentive to spill and to run the generators rather than an incentive to hold and store.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I think there's a tendency to think of hydro as just being a big battery, but there are limits on how much they can raise lake levels and how much water they can hold on to. But at the same time, they're not always operated in the best interests of keeping electricity low. If it doesn't take too many dots to join that. They will run run those hydro generators when the price is high, not when the price is low, right? So it's about, I think, really what we're about is essentially providing an alternative to exploiting the network and the pricing in it that way, and earning a more stable revenue through multiple sources, either through the grid or through a Bitcoin mine.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So I guess trying to just expand on these two sort of things we've got going on here. We've got kind of grid share with your New Zealand Monowai operation, sort of looking to grow this, what you're doing in New Zealand with sustainably mined Bitcoin. And then you've also got this thing we talked about earlier with developing nations, landfill, methane capture, etc. Those two, I mean, those are maybe similar, but there's quite a lot of different things going on there. How are you guys focusing on those? I mean, what sort of ratio of your time is spent on both of them? Like, how do you sort of jump between those two?
Yeah, challenging. I mean, Monowai is very much operational now. It's about keeping things running, and we can start to hand that process over to a team that's running it, and so that we're less hands-on running it day to day. There are unusual things that we do at that site compared to most Bitcoin mines. We're turning on and off, and we're making decisions about that. We're also adding services to that, such as reserves market participation. So providing frequency stability, basically. In Australia, that's the FCAS markets. Here, we're able to respond by shutting off very rapidly the data center. So we're adding these sorts of services to that site, but that site will ultimately become operational. We may demonstrate new technologies that we've developed there. So it is still going to be a site that is progressing and helping us develop and prove technologies and demonstrate them. But we hope sort of through this year, we will see that site become more operational and stable than proof of concept.
Okay, so moving from a proof of concept, I mean, it's been 2 years. You guys have, I guess, ironed out a lot of the challenges. You've got a system in place, and then moving to kind of business as usual.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so the focus in the last few months have been developing lines into the landfill side. They can be quite lengthy projects too. Identifying a landfill that has no infrastructure, to propose to them that you were going to come in and cap the landfill and extract the gas and run it through a generator and put a data center on site, that's a significant project. So that could take a year to come to fruition. So some of those projects are quite long lead time. Some of them can be quite short if they have some infrastructure there already. So it's really about identifying many different opportunities and then working through the pipeline, whatever the particular stage of that project might be at.
Yeah, I see. And I guess, Monowai becomes business as usual. And then as I asked earlier, sort of what is the scale or the opportunity for projects like that, kind of the next one? And as we've talked about offline, I know there is a lot of interest in New Zealand. There's a certain brand associated with it. And it's, if you had an option to go in country A or to go into New Zealand, many people would be really interested in Bitcoin mining in New Zealand, given the rule of law, safety, and also just the image.
Yep.
It's very sustainably mined. I mean, do you have? how many megawatts of capacity do you think there is to roll out Bitcoin?
There's plenty. I mean, there was a project that didn't take off at the Lake Preem project at the Clyde Dam site. I think that was 10
a couple of years ago.
10 or 15 megawatts.
Okay.
So that didn't happen, but it could have happened. it just was, I guess, a bit of an unfortunate public relations disaster. It's unfortunate that they chose a UK company to come in when there was a New Zealand company here doing it. And
was that as in yourselves? Or
yeah, we were in discussions for that particular site as well.
I see.
And so when so we went off to pursue the Monowai project instead. But I think there's huge potential. It's about shifting the mindset of. It seems very counterintuitive to solve some of these problems by bringing data centers into the loop. But when you explain all the benefits they can bring through operating them flexibly, there's a whole heap of opportunity in New Zealand for more operations like this.
Absolutely. And I guess one of the last points I wanted to touch on, which I hope you're happy to weigh in on it, is the question of Tiwai Point and that project, because I know Meridian and New Zealand aluminium smelters have just signed off on a deal to keep that Tiwai Point smelter operational, and that was incredibly cheap electricity. Do you have any insight into what's going on there, and if there's any opportunities with that?
Yeah, look, I think it was fairly obvious that they were going to stay, given the demand for green aluminium. Basically, I think it would be a reasonable bet that the world is going to need more green aluminium in the energy transition, and you could say that in quote unquote as well, because it does produce emissions just smelting aluminium, but it certainly beats all the other forms of large scale aluminium production. And I think, they've managed to agree on a demand response agreement that I think is more or less what we have built, trying to achieve, is by, I think the words they use is acting like a big battery. So turning off, being able to configure the operation to turn off does provide benefit. It's about an industry player that uses a lot of energy in the New Zealand context, but is able to be flexible and accommodate times of dry years and times of scarcity. I think that's the way this all needs to go. This is how all Bitcoin mines should be operated, not just aluminium smelters. Yeah. But it's the way forward. It's about being a good citizen. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's incentives there, right? They get the good price, and I did read into their investors' release that detailed their demand response, and what stood out to me is it was just turning off the smelter, and they had quite a lot of lead time required. I think it was sometimes 10 days, and then there was less lead time options, but the length of that turn off was maybe less, and only a number of times over the year they could do it, etc.
Yeah, there's no doubt that operationally turning off a smelter has implications. I'm not an expert on smelters, but I know that if you let that stuff cool down, you've ruined the pot, basically. So they need to plan it ahead. They're sort of at the other end of demand response from what we're really trying to offer as the main product is being able to rapidly turn off.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah.
They play the long game, and they're hundreds of megawatts turning off. I don't think we're going to get ourselves to the 100 megawatts, but we can react very rapidly, but perhaps be more distributed around the country at renewable energy sites, providing the same service. I don't see any reason we can't essentially emulate the same volume of demand response that they provide, but just throughout a distributed network of renewable energy in New Zealand.
Have you come across virtual power plants as a concept? Yeah. How would you describe that, and what are your thoughts on that, given the model you've just mentioned with distributed?
Yeah, no, it is like a virtual power plant.
What is it?
You're referring to essentially utilising all the batteries that might be in a suburb or in a city in a unified and controlled way to deliver either energy out of the battery or to just offset whatever is being consumed on the site, thereby releasing demand from the grid at times of need. And Solar Zero is a company that's executed this.
Solar Zero?
With their solar and battery installations they've put into the homes. I did do a little bit of work with them on that project in the early days, and it's been it's been trialled in a lot of different countries. I think Germany's particularly good at virtual power plants, and Australia has too in some communities. And it's fantastic. It makes a lot of sense. The challenge, the reason I didn't go further into that, and from my prior career in power electronics, was the recognition that the standards of communication and interoperability to get everybody on board of that platform, the idea that we can get all these different kinds of batteries with a common protocol that all communicate, and everyone in the home agrees, yes, you can use my battery, or yes, you can use my car that's plugged in. I see that as a real challenge. It's a challenge for society to arrive at a point where all those people will act for the greater good and not for their own selfish needs.
There'd be a pricing mechanism there, though, right?
Yep.
So there would be an incentive to release to the grid.
There's all sorts of ways you can do that, and absolutely. All I'm saying is I chose the path of grid share because I felt like trying to get all of those challenges, the hurdles of the standards and the human agreement to adopt into participating in these programs is a big hurdle. We'll get there, but that's a long play. We should be working on it. I applaud people who are working on this, but that's a long slog. I think that we can achieve faster, more rapid effect in the same way using flexible data centers.
Yeah. I would tend to agree with that. I mean, how many hot water cylinders do you need to turn off? You know, it's sort of, if you've got the Bitcoin miners, I mean, that's just a lot clearer. It's sort of less moving parts in a sense because you've got less.
I also don't want to set it up as a this or that. You can have both. I mean, we've used ripple control for load management in New Zealand for a very, very long time, and it's absolutely plays a role, absolutely. But we're really relying now on bringing devices in homes up to standard where they can be reliably instructed to turn off, and that is happening. But it's not like we're going to have a rollout of battery to every single person's home. That's just an enormous amount of chemistry. It's an enormous amount of raw material. I think that we can achieve the same effect quite quicker and for less cost with our approach. But I'm not saying it's not valuable.
Yeah.
It's still valuable. We should be employing it where it exists.
Having a balanced mixture.
Yeah.
That's cool, Sam. And I guess in terms of, say, the next 12 months and sort of what you're looking forward to, is there anything you sort of want to share, or sort of generally just sort of what you're looking forward to for grid share?
Yeah, look, one exciting thing that we've just done is at the Monowai site, I mentioned sort of trialing new things. We've just installed our first general compute piece of equipment in there to trial. We're trialing that piece of equipment. It doesn't run Bitcoin mining services. It's providing compute services to a New Zealand company that provides software testing. Hopefully we can talk about that a bit more in the future, but that's really exciting for us, because for us this is about solving an energy affordability and challenge development problem. Bitcoin has been this amazing journey that we've accidentally, it's like a travelator we've stepped onto. It's been an amazing journey, but compute generally is part of this picture for us too, is cracking the challenge of bringing compute to this energy flexibility as well. So that's quite exciting for us to get into that and offer New Zealand companies compute that is done in New Zealand on renewable energy. I think that's really exciting. And more broadly, I think getting into the landfill space, proving that we've got a couple of projects we'd like to prove the landfill operation side in New Zealand, and then projects that are essentially due to be signed and kicked off in the next few months overseas.
Yeah, that's exciting. And the landfills in New Zealand as a model for how it can then be exported, I mean, that seems quite exciting.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to be winning any awards on additionality to carbon reduction because they're already doing a great job, but we can help some of those sites where they might be grid constrained. They can't export the electricity because the grid can't take it. We can come in and help them with that piece of their methane destruction.
Yeah. And I guess one final piece, I mean, I'm really interested in, I guess, the storytelling of this. It really is a challenge. I try my best with this show to tell the story of what people like yourselves are doing in that. But how do you see the story of what GridShare is doing, the opportunities for methane capture, and there's all of these benefits and lower costs of electricity? I mean, how do you communicate that?
It's tricky. It's challenging, and I'll be the first to say that I'm not the gifted communicator in this front, or the storyteller. So I think it's getting smart people on board who know how to tell that story. But we're still building our story. We've been operating a demonstrator site for 2 years now. It's probably time to start talking about that and what the impact that's had. But you're right, there are so many pieces to the story that requires just digging a little bit deeper into how renewable energy works, how do grids work, how do landfills work, how does the methane impact the atmosphere.
I mean, it stands out to me. I mean, I know the Monowai site's a bit remote, but it just it stands out to me as the kind of place where people almost need to just see it with their own eyes.
It's a beautiful place. I've just been down there. I've just spent 10 days down there, almost all of those days alone in a data center.
Meditative.
It's very cold, but there is just the most beautiful view up the Waio River, about 20 meters from the site, from the gate. And so you can just walk down and look up the river over the power station that's been there for 125 years, I think.
Yeah.
And it's just such a stunning piece of the world, part of the world. I'd love to get more people down there. I'd love to build a Bitcoin heated hot pool there. That's something that I would love to do, and just and an EV charging point so people could come and charge and soak in some hot pools there.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing. and I guess, as I said, I wrote that article about how Queenstown, is a bit of a hub for Bitcoin innovation in New Zealand, and I think the South Island generally really punches above its weight. We've got the BitKiwi conference coming up on Saturday, and there's a lot of stuff happening here, and it just stands out to me that at a corporate, even political level, you could say, it's just these people aren't seeing it. And I mean, I'd love to just get some attention on it, because the work you guys are doing is awesome, and I think with a lot of these things, seeing the data center, seeing the environment, and just understanding, this is renewable, this is sustainable, this is good stuff.
It's providing a service that could be not renewable.
Yeah.
There will be people in the world doing this that aren't renewable, but the more renewable energy we have doing this, the harder it is for those who aren't renewably inclined to do their work. So the more we do it, the harder it is for this to not be renewable.
Yeah. No, that sounds great, man. Well, look, I appreciate your time and for hosting me here at your office, and sharing your story and what you're working on. I wish you all the best with the landfills journey, and it sounds like it might take you to some interesting locations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, man, thanks, Sam, for your time.
Yeah. Thanks, Cody. Thanks for your mahis telling the story. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am codyellingham, and that was the Transformation of Value. If you would like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.